Claudio, one of the things that's really going on in our industry, and something that I've recently spent some time thinking and writing about, is the intersection of personalization and privacy, and that in many ways the industry treats these things as at odds. And I know my perspective is these things have to be more in concert. That there's a balance here, and I think you share some of those same perspectives. I'd love you to share your thoughts on in a world becoming ever more personalized, ever more driven by data. How do we find that right balance, and what do you think the right path forward is on that?
Well, I think it really comes down to a suitable value exchange between the consumer and the marketer, right? So I think that we can find some common ground around things like personalization, which is basically this idea that I'm using the data in a way that I can provide more value for you, whether that's surface relevant content or relevant ideas and other value propositions. But I think we also need to be respectful and take into account the consumer point of view of things. So whereas I think that uses of data to segment and identify people that have common interests or groups of people that may be interested in a particular product or piece of content, that is relevant and valuable and is a type of personalization. I think we need to be respectful and have people understand also that when we talk about personalization, even though the benefit to the consumer is a more personalized experience, that from a data perspective, what we're doing is aggregating data sets to understand groups of people that share some common interests, and therefore this particular piece of content or product may be of interest to people that in some ways look like you, right? And I think that's kind of lost in the way we execute things today. And so I think we need to establish that value exchange where people understand, and maybe by keying in on just a few key applications that are very clear to consumers. So for example, that if we have a common understanding of what ads you've been exposed to, we can then limit the number of times that you're exposed to a particular ad, right? That's a good value exchange for the marketer in the sense of not delivering too much frequency of ad exposure. And it's a very good value for the consumer that doesn't want to be overexposed to the same ad over and over.
Right. Right. You know, we talk a lot about that at TransUnion too, given all the various businesses we're in this exchange, right? We often think about it as information for good, right? There is value of having access to information to the consumer, but it does seem really hard to get the consumer, us at large that don't spend time in this industry like we do, to appreciate that value exchange. Do you have thoughts on how we help the consumer better appreciate this reality?
I think the starting point is for us to take that perspective, right? So for us to think through what really drives value and what deters value from the consumer. So whether they clearly understand it or not, we certainly can, we're all consumers. We can certainly step into their shoes and understand what may be an irritant versus what might be maybe something that provides a value to that consumer, right? So for example, when we use data for tracking people at a very granular level and following them around the internet, that we would probably agree is an irritant, and therefore
Right.
we shouldn't support those kind of practices as an
Yeah.
industry, right?
Yeah.
And that is I think the core proposition relative to understanding what a suitable value exchange is. I think secondarily, there is some work we could do to educate consumers, and that's more around focusing on some very few high value applications for consumers, like more relevant advertising
Mm-hmm.
or getting rid of ads that follow you around or that
Yeah.
you're exposed to over and over. Just a few very core, very high value applications for consumers could help us illustrate the case that we do take these things into account and that we're trying to focus on creating more value by delivering more relevant content, more relevant products without being annoying about it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And so maybe lastly, as you think about the speed of change, right? A lot of what we're talking about now is how so much has been change has been accelerated as the result of our new normal, which again is in many ways a new normal. We'll certainly be interacting in ways that back to feel like yesterday's normal, more so than we are today. But this change is somewhat permanent. We've become more digitized. We've come more expectations have risen on our capabilities around using digital technology and that personalization. So as you think about what's going to happen over this next several months or years on this topic, how do you see this change continuing to speed up if it does? And what are the key things that we in the industry can do to make sure this balance continues to be found, I suppose, ultimately?
I agree with you that I think we are going to see some acceleration due to the changes in conditions, and a greater understanding of the role that data plays for the broader ecosystem, not just the marketing ecosystem, but in general. But I also think that one of the ways that we can support that acceleration is to remove some of the known roadblocks, which primarily are around some of the concerns that people have about abuses of data, privacy and security of data. And so that means putting in not just best practices, but really adopting standards as an industry, or even agreeing to some degree of regulation that makes sense in terms of implementing the use cases that make sense from both a consumer perspective and a marketer perspective. And I think there's plenty of common ground there to be had. So I think we can put our best foot forward and start to recognize the things that get in our way of actually having a more fruitful value exchange for both consumers and marketers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Listen, count us in wanting to help you fight that same cause, and hopefully we can do a lot to continue to make that possible.
There's a lot more people in the industry than we think that are well aligned on this, and a few bad actors, some of them significant in scale, can ruin the pie for everybody.
So, Claudio, the impact of personalization and data and privacy and that balance certainly also directly impacts what you guys are doing at Comcast, and it has a big impact certainly on the future of television, especially when we think about the business of TV as broadly defined, streaming, linear, all forms, right? And that industry and that marketplace is clearly also going through a lot of evolution. I've been spending some time thinking and talking about the fact that there's a longer tail of marketers which are going to be more involved in this premium video TV ecosystem. In many cases, these marketers have expectations that are more digital in nature, are more performant in nature. And so I would guess that a lot of what you guys are spending time thinking about is how to integrate maybe these more traditional television businesses with this more digital personalization mindset. Is that true? And maybe you can share some of what's going on inside Comcast.
Well, I think in general, on the consumer side, as viewing becomes increasingly fragmented across many channels and many platforms and devices, that's certainly the case. And we're also increasingly digital, even in traditional, what might have been traditional linear viewing is becoming increasingly digital through the introduction of addressability that enables us to do ad insertion on an individual device or targeted household basis. So I think that that's absolutely right, that we are seeing those trends, and that we need to take into account some of the things around the user experience across that fragmented viewing. And that requires having data to understand who's been exposed to what types of content do they prefer in what channels and things like that. And again, those are uses of data that help us personalize the experience and drive more value for both the consumer and the advertiser relative to how we make decisions about which ads to expose to which consumers. And as far as incremental participants in the ecosystem from a business's perspective, from a brand's perspective, we are seeing more brands come in, particularly because as TV becomes increasingly digital-like, you can support more targeting, more data-driven planning, more measurement, attribution use cases, and those are the kinds of things that most of the digital marketers have become accustomed to. So I think it is attracting those types of brands into the TV video ecosystem, and we want to be able to support that increase interest in advertising on TV and video. So yes, we're very interested in those emerging brands that are increasingly trying TV and video and bringing their digital mindset to it.